Welcome back to Fast Market here on the Schwab Network. It's time for our cash tag segment. So let's bring in our next guest for that, and that's going to be Andy Swan. He's a co-founder at LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Andy.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. So we have a semiconductor chip-based show today. We're talking Nvidia with you guys. As I mentioned before the break, stock's up, 215% so far this year. It seems like the valuation's actually coming down a little bit because they're just blowing out numbers left and right due to demand. Do you guys have the data at LikeFolio that backs this up?
Yeah, I mean, Nvidia has just been a one-way street in terms of demand growth, stock price growth, really just a runaway winner that we haven't seen in quite a while. It's one of those stories where, a high PE ratio sometimes justifies itself through growth, just like high dividend, payers can sometimes justify themselves by falling. And so with Nvidia, look, we think it's clearly the leader. It's clearly got all of the AI tailwinds. The last earnings report that they put out, when basically I think they put out what is probably history's biggest beat and raise in stock market history, and the stock ended up flat. That ended up, for me, being a little bit of a yellow flag that some of this cycle in terms of investor enthusiasm was falling off. And so I'm not sure about Nvidia from here. I think they have everything going for them business-wise, and tailwind-wise with the AI movement. What we're really looking at is, who's number two? Who's going to get that spillover from all of this demand, whether it's data center, AI, or general computing? And, so far between Intel and AMD, we're really seeing AMD come away as what we think the big winner of that second place silver medal race. Web visits to AMD up considerably, overall consumer mentions up considerably. So we think, AMD could be the play here. We think Nvidia is a multi-decade, multi-year winner that's already underway. But, sometimes I think when one company gets all of the spotlight, when an entire sector is growing like semiconductors is, there's a lot of opportunity in that second place player, and we think so far that looks like AMD.
Andy, your data that you put out this morning, showing the dominance of AMD and Nvidia against a company like Intel, it tells me, I ate your lunch last week, I'm eating your lunch this week, and I'm going to eat your lunch next week, is what these two firms are saying. This is turning into kind of a two-horse race here in terms of chips. That said, can Nvidia put together another quarter where the stock goes up $100 and the valuations come down because the earnings are so good? Now, they're not cheap, right? Their history of price to sales is 19.6. They're currently at 35. So they've got a bar to jump over, but they've shown they can do it in the past. The problem, though, the cautionary tale here is competition, right? Yep. We saw it in the internet near the 2000s. We saw it in crypto. We saw it in streaming in the last couple of years. And the question is the next one going to be AI in terms of competition cutting into some of these valuations? I'd like to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we've talked about, the three of us have talked about many times the fact that a lot of times companies are very expensive for very good reason, because they're very likely to grow into those multiples. We saw it with Amazon. We've seen it with Tesla. We've seen it with Nvidia. So valuation is not what scares me as much on Nvidia as what scares me a little bit is that, in what was it, Q2, they had that big blowout earnings that just absolutely ripped the market apart. The stock went up incredibly. No one had ever seen anything like it. And then their last earnings report, they put out basically the same thing, raising guidance by billions of dollars, beating profit estimates by billions of dollars. and the stock closed flat. So it tells me that Wall Street's expectations have adjusted to, sort of like, if they don't hit a grand slam, it's a disappointing at bat. And so if they come up in this next earnings report and just hit a triple and only raise their outlook by a few $billion, what will happen to the stock? Because they've set themselves up where it's impossible to predict what they're going to be able to produce. And Wall Street just kind of expects them to blow everything away again. So that, I think, is the biggest risk for Nvidia. I think on the other side of the coin, AMD, what we're seeing at LikeFolio in terms of that web visits, I think is the best predictor of revenue for AMD. It tells us that, people that can't get the Nvidia chips, that's where they're going. And I think that's a considerable and growing bucket because there's only so much Nvidia can produce. And I think that's the big limiting factor. It's got nothing to do with demand. It's how much can they produce.
Andy, when you guys look at sectors like this, we're talking chips, we're talking all three of these names that you brought us data on, which is awesome. But do you look at other sectors that are like this where the first in is going to win? And if they continue to innovate the way that Nvidia does, it's almost like you can't move away from them because they're innovating at a faster pace. They're first to market. Do you see that in other sectors like you're seeing that here with Nvidia?
Yeah, I think we really saw that with Google. We saw that with Amazon. We are seeing that with Tesla. I think that happens more often, I think, than we like to give credit to. A lot of times people think of like the first mover as the pioneer that gets all the arrows in the back. I think, if you do it and you do it really well, like Nvidia is doing with AI, then it can be a lead that never gets caught. And I think that's a likely scenario for Nvidia. But I also think that the pie is big enough to have more than one winner as we go forward, just as we will in those other sectors.
Yeah, we've definitely seen demand outpace supply at this point in this space. So it's supposed to last a couple years. Lisa Su said through 2027 for some of these chip makers, the AI boom. So we'll have to wait and see on that. All right, Andy, great stuff as always. Have a great weekend.
You too, appreciate it.
All right, that's Andy Swan, co-founder at LikeFolio, breaking down Nvidia data. Kev, we've been